So as we learn who Peter is and we learn his decision making, we set ourselves up to read his letters just a little bit differently. So starting the second week of July, we are going to be all in on 1st and 2nd Peter till the end of summer. Okay? So some things that we've already said that need to be said are that Peter was a real person. He's not a fictional character in a book. He was a real person who was really changed by God. And we get to see some of that change as we move from young man Peter into old man Peter when he writes his letters. God truly was changing him. And the things that I like about Peter, but I think resonate with all of us, is that Peter liked to be in control. He really did. If you haven't seen it yet, or maybe this is your first Sunday here, if you go back and watch the first 2 weeks, you will see that there is not a week where we will talk about Peter where Peter doesn't want to be in control. Okay? Peter liked to be in control, but Peter also wanted to surrender himself to Jesus. Is there anyone in the room who likes to be in control but also wants to surrender themselves to Jesus? This is why we love Peter. Peter is a gift to us. The details of his life are a gift because as we watch Peter, we go, hey, I'm that in all of his bad things, and hey, I'm also that in all of his good things. Because following Jesus is messy. If you haven't figured it out yet, following Jesus is messy. So, Peter has now, at this point in our story, Peter has been journeying with Jesus for 3 years. I mean, they've been together in almost every situation possible. All the cool stuff that Jesus does, where he pulls just a few disciples aside, Peter's always in that list. He's always one of the cool ones who gets to do the cool stuff. So he has seen and witnessed everything. He has seen miracles. He has seen healing. He has been a part of how those things have happened. And now we're 3 years later, and we are at the end of Jesus' ministry. 3 years of that. You think he's got it all figured out? How many of you have been following Jesus more than 3 years? Me too. Me too. So, we've reached a place in the story where Jesus has taken his disciples into a room at the top of somebody's house. We call it the upper room. And they're journeying in that space together, and we're getting close to the end. And what we're going to do is we're going to see another example of the Peter that reminds us too much of ourselves. Here we go. John chapter 13, starting at verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come. Everybody say the hour had come. For him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. John loves the word love, just for the record. And what's happening here is they're in the upper room. It's this Passover festival time. It's this week where the Jewish people remember God's deliverance from Egypt. And there's a series of meals and worship, and there's all this time, this sacrifice. And in the middle of this, Jesus finds himself in this upper room with his 12 disciples, and they are coming together. And at this moment, Jesus is looking around, and he's thinking to himself, it's time. I mean, throughout the Gospels, you'll hear over and over again Jesus say, the time has not yet come. The time has not yet come. The time has not yet come. Now, all of a sudden, the hour had come. Something has flipped inside of Jesus' mind. This is a big deal. The hour had come. And what John is sharing with us is that Jesus loved his people. He loved the people of this world, and he loved them till the hour had come. He loved them all the way to the end. In verse 2, it says, the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Now, if you don't know the story of Jesus, this is a pretty important moment. See, there's a disciple named Judas, and Judas has been prompted or tempted, or because of his own sin inside of him, has decided that he's willing to give up Jesus to the Jewish people who want to see him killed. And John refers to that as the devil had already prompted Judas. But Judas, the way this story goes, Judas eventually leads them to Jesus, and that's how Jesus is arrested. One of his closest disciples, one of the ones in the room for all the stuff that happened, his heart had turned. And he would betray Jesus. So what John is telling us is just that Judas is in the room when this happens, okay? Verse 3 and 4, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. I mean, this is interesting. Jesus is contemplating his life, and he's like, man, I came from God. I'm going back to God. See, this whole journey on earth, he's been focused on the people and the cross. But in this moment, he's like, whoa, I'm going back. He's thinking about his future. What's happening is now that the hour had come, Jesus is thinking about his journey. He's thinking about his journey from heaven to humanity, and that journey will take him right back to heaven. It's coming. So he gets up from the table. What does he do? No. He takes off his outer clothing, puts a towel around his waist. Okay? So he showed up looking like the man. He's got a cloak on. He's got his shirt on underneath. He's ready to go. Now he's taking off his cloak and putting a towel on his waist. After that, in verse 5, he poured into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet. This is an interesting, John is giving us a lot of detail, like step by step what is happening. Why? Because John is there. John is one of the 12. He's in the room. He's watching what's happening and he's going, okay, then he did this, then he did this. So he filled a basin with water and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with that towel that he put around him. Now hold up. Rabbis don't wash their people's feet. I don't like to touch anybody's feet. But there was a time, teenagers in the room, there was a time before vehicles. I don't know if you knew that. Like there was a time before cell phones. There was a time before Jordans. Like there was a time where like a pair of shoes with laces that you like tie up, like that's crazy. It's crazy. So during that time, these people just walked everywhere. There was a time before pavement. And they're walking on these dirt roads, and the dirt is getting in the crevices of their feet as they walk around. Heaven forbid it have a little bit of moisture in the air. And now it's getting a little muddy, a little caked on, right? You go into rural areas, and they don't even have sewer systems yet. So all the animal waste is on the side of the road, and you're just walking through it. So here's the thing, I don't want that in my house. So at every house as you would enter, there would be a bowl with some water. And there are two options. One option is you wash your own feet because I can't afford a servant. Option two is my servant washes your feet. There is no option three where the man washes your feet, the man in charge, the rabbi, where he steps in. That's not an option. But here's Jesus taking off his cloak, putting on a towel, kneeling before his disciples. I mean, there's even stuff in the Old Testament that tells us that a rabbi is the one washing the feet. The teacher is the one washing the feet. So, rabbi is the one washing the feet. The teacher is the one washing the feet. So, it's Peter's turn. Here we go. Verse 6. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? I mean, is this really about to happen? Are you really going to do this? I think one of the things that crosses my mind is, Peter has been around Jesus enough that it seems like everything Jesus does is intentional because he's Jesus, and there's always a story. So it's like, Lord, am I supposed to let you do this? Or is this one of those things where you stop halfway through and go, you thought I was supposed to wash your feet. However, you were supposed to stop me. because I'm king. What's happening here? And is this a parable that we don't understand yet? Is this something that we haven't figured out yet and we're supposed to stop? Is this a parable that we don't understand yet? Is this something that we haven't figured out yet and we're supposed to stop you, or are we supposed to just let this happen? So I think there actually is a hidden parable here, to be honest with you. One that I don't necessarily always hear preachers talk about. But I think there's a hidden thing in here that I think we're supposed to see in the steps that Jesus took to wash the feet. Check this out. First, he got up from his seat. Second, he removed his outer garments. Third, he put on a servant's towel. Fourth, he lowered himself to a servant. And fifth, he washed their feet, right? You've already heard me say all that. You're like, no, duh, I've already heard that from you. Here's what I think also is true at the very same time. I think there's a bigger thing here. One, when he got up from the table, he was leaving his place of comfort. And then two, when he rid himself of his cloak, it's similar to how he rid himself of his glory to come to earth. When he put on that towel, he took the role of a servant, which means he took his place in humanity. He stepped into being human. Fourth, he gave his life just like a servant. He gave his life for others. And then fifth, his sacrifice washes our sin. I think there's a deeper thing going on here where Jesus, through this act of foot washing, is not only teaching them a lesson about what it means to be a servant, I think he's preaching the gospel. I think he's telling them about how he came to earth to die for their sin, and he's telling them that he is here to cleanse them of sin. So, Peter says to him, "Are you really going to wash my feet?" And here's Jesus' reply. Jesus replied in verse 7, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." So here's what he's saying to him. He's saying, "Hey, Peter, I know this makes no sense to you. I know this is hard for you to figure out, but you're going to get it later." Peter's response, "No," said Peter. "You shall never," everybody say never. "You shall never wash my feet." I mean, think about that. Jesus, the one who's always got an intentional spot, he's always got your best interest in heart. He has taught you so well for 3 years. And then he says to you, "I've got a new teaching for you, but you just don't understand it yet, but you will. Never will you wash my feet." Never. When I read that, I immediately started to think of Jesus saying, "Trust me," and Peter saying, "Never." Of Jesus saying, "Trust me," and Peter saying, "Never." Now, I'd like to think if I was in that same situation, and Jesus said, "You don't understand now, but you will. It's coming. Okay, it's coming. Be patient." I would like to think that at the worst version of myself, I would be saying to him, "I'm not sure I believe you." I don't think there's any version of me that just looks at Jesus in the eyes and goes, "Never will you wash my feet." Jesus is saying, "Trust me." Peter's response is never. Man, if you were with us last week, this should be a flashback moment for you. Because there's this spot where Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter responds, and he says, "You are the Son of God, the Messiah." And Jesus is like, "Yeah, now I got stuff to tell you. Listen, I'm going to die, and I'm going to raise from the dead." And Peter responded to Jesus in Matthew 16, verse 22. Check this out. Peter took Jesus aside. He took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord." Everybody say never. All right. Peter's so black and white, isn't he? "Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Imagine, Jesus looked at Peter and said, "I'm going to die on the cross." And Peter's response was, "Never. It's never going to happen. As long as I'm here, it's not happening." In verse 23, Jesus turned to him and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." So we talked last week about how in this moment, what Jesus is saying is not you're fired. He's saying, let me lead. Get behind me. Because you don't know what you don't know. So, in this moment, in this upper room, when the hour had finally come for Jesus to start thinking about death, Peter looks at him and says, never, never will you wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Unless I do this thing that I'm trying to do, you're not with me, Peter. I'm not yours. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Once again, Jesus has decided the best way to teach is to wash feet. Now what Peter's doing is trying to change Jesus' teaching to include other parts of the body. Because even in this moment, Peter's still trying to be in control. Wash my head, you do what you gotta do because I want you to know that I am all in. John 13, verse 10, Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean. Whoa. And Jesus' response was, you are clean. Now, wait a minute. And Jesus' response was, you are clean. Now, wait a minute. You can't tell Jesus never and still be clean. Don't take it up with me, take it up with Jesus. Because Peter, you are clean, though not every one of you, because there's one of the 12, right? Judas, whose heart has already turned. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that's why he said not everyone was clean. So what that means is even though Jesus washed Judas's feet, Judas was still unclean. And even though Peter said never, somehow Peter was clean. Isn't that interesting? It's something I want to wrestle with for weeks to come, to be honest with you. But folks, one of the things that Jesus is trying to point out to Peter is this was never about a physical washing. This whole story is not about your feet stink or they're dirty and they needed clean. So Jesus was like, well, if you're all not going to clean your own feet, I'll get up and clean your feet for you. That's not what this is about. What Jesus is trying to point out is that there is some sort of spiritual washing that is performed by Jesus. One of the things I want you to hear this morning is that when we say yes to him, we are saved. Amen? When we say yes to Jesus, we are saved and we are bathed because we are saved. We don't need a full washing because we have already said yes to Jesus. Yet the journey towards him, oh, don't miss this. Don't miss this. The journey towards Jesus is dirty. Not because he's dirty, but because this world and our hearts are dirty. So we say yes to Jesus, we're bathed and we're clean, and then he goes, follow me. And every step we take, we get dirty. Anybody in here get dirty when they try to follow Jesus? That's the truth, because even though we're moving in the right direction, we're so fallen as humans. Our attitude makes us dirty. The way we approach other people, the way we approach other people's sin, the way we judge other people for the way they think, the way we look at other people and we get angry at them sometimes and we can't control it. It's dirty. And it doesn't mean that we've somehow magically fallen away from Jesus. It just means that being human is hard. And as we move towards him and he puts more light on the things in our life that are causing us to fall apart, it's dirty. See, we're bathed when we're saved, yet the journey towards him is full of pitfalls and poor decisions. We must be willing to ask for forgiveness. Let Christ wash our feet. Y'all, if you say yes to Jesus, and maybe you did it here, maybe there was a beautiful, perfect song in the perfect moment at the perfect key, and Jesse's voice was at the perfect volume, and everything and the angels fell from the sky, and you were like, yo, today's the day I'm getting saved. and you came forward to an altar and you had a moment where you said yes to Jesus, you were bathed and you woke up the next day and you didn't try to live any differently and you didn't try to take in the word of God and you thought and you woke up the next day and you didn't try to live any differently and you didn't try to take in the word of God and you thought having that one moment up here was enough. It wasn't, because your feet are dirty. Because you've been living life, and as we live life, we struggle. You can't just kneel up here and be the same when you go. Your feet need washed because the journey is hard. In fact, the journey isn't hard. The word, I'm going to say this, the journey is messy. It just is. Sometimes we step in waste. Sometimes we step in just dirt. But it's messy. It's messy. Verse 12, when he had finished washing their feet, we can assume from this statement that Jesus did eventually get down to washing Peter's feet. Okay, he said, you can wash all these other things and my feet. And Jesus is like, I got your feet. I'm not interested in like shampooing your hair. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes, so he put back on his robe. Remember the signification of him coming to earth and taking that off. He's putting it back on. He's going back to his comfortable seat at the table. And he says, do you understand what I have done for you? If they're honest, my guess is the answer should have been no, we do not. Peter clearly didn't understand. Verse 13, you call me teacher and Lord. And rightly so, for that is what I am. I am your teacher. I am your Lord. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet. I don't like this part. You are to wash one another's feet. See, one of the messages he's trying to give here is when he washes our feet, he's offering us forgiveness. And then he's looking at us and he's saying, do you offer forgiveness to each other? Love that I get to thank him for that. But the part where I have to forgive other people, love that I get to thank him for that. But the part where I have to forgive other people, they don't deserve my forgiveness. You ever felt that way? You ever thought in your spirit, they don't deserve my forgiveness? Well, neither do I. That's one. And two, when you forgive them, neither do I. That's one. And two, when you forgive them, you don't let them off the hook, you let yourself off the hook. You say, this struggle, this pain, I'm not holding on to it anymore, I'm moving forward. That's forgiveness at its finest. And Jesus is saying to his disciples, do for each other what I have done for you. Offer spiritual forgiveness. Serve one another. Be there for each other. Do what I have done for you. In verse 15, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you talk about them a lot. No, that's not what it says. You will be blessed if you do them. If I'm doing this, you're not greater than me. If I'm doing this, you're not greater than me. You don't get to sit above me. If I'm willing to serve others, no servant is greater than his master. You should be willing to serve others. I have set an example from you from the top. That means in order to stay under me, you got to do the things I do. So when he serves us, but we won't serve each other, we're actually saying that we're greater than Jesus. How's that for a pride check? It's a further fall. For Jesus to go from heaven is a further fall. For Jesus to go from heaven to washing the feet of man, or for us to go from man to washing the feet of man. The jump that he made to show us what it looks like to be a servant, he's asking for something so much smaller from us. So much smaller. If I'm doing this, don't tell me you can't. So, what I want you to hear is that to think on and discuss these things that Jesus has taught them may have value, but church, we are where you all take notes and go, well, that was interesting. The question is, what do you do? Where you all take notes and go, well, that was interesting. The question is, what do you do? What causes action from you as you begin to move towards Jesus? So, I'm leaving you with just 3 questions. Here's what Jesus did. It's what he did. Jesus did. It's what he did. The man, the God, the Lord of all, who lived life on earth, then died on a cross, is asking you to serve your neighbor. It's such a small request from someone who gave up his life. And yet we're like, ooh, this is really difficult. Man, I can't imagine what would be more difficult than like speaking to my neighbor. Ugh. I got a few things. One would be dying on a cross. Are you willing to serve? Jesus did. 2, do you need a bath? I'm for real. For me to assume that every person in this room is a follower of Jesus would be foolish. See, Jesus says that when you accept him, it's like taking a bath. He washes you all clean. And then there are some of you, some of us, who have already been washed, but the truth is man, like, I don't want anyone else to see it but me, but I want to know who I'm talking to, you know? I don't want anyone else to see it but me, but I want to know who I'm talking to, you know? Like, are you in this room and you don't know Jesus? Let me help you. Jesus wants to cleanse you. He died for you, but because he's God, he was able to raise from the dead. And there's a moment where he's coming back to earth. And in that moment, he takes his children home. But y'all, I don't want you to miss that. And maybe while we've been talking this morning, you've been stirring a little bit. And maybe you're not weird enough to stand up and say, I need a bath. I get it. But maybe inside you know you do. Maybe inside you have never said yes to Jesus fully. Today is the day of salvation. Today is a day where you can choose to say yes to him. Don't be distracted by the people walking up for worship. Look at me. This is an important moment for someone. Coming to church is not it. Saying yes to Jesus is it. So if you're in the room today and you're just like, man, I don't know about all this, and I don't really even understand what's happening, my response to you would be the same response Jesus gave Peter. You do not yet know what's happening, but it's going to make sense in a few minutes. It's going to make sense in a few days, in a few years. And what I would tell you is in this moment, you can say yes to Jesus and your life can be changed forever because he's given you a bath. And that's the weirdest way I can possibly say salvation. But it's true. You can be cleansed. Don't leave here. Don't leave here wrestling with that. Resolve it today. Do you need a bath? Do you need a bath? Jesus can save you. For those of you who have already been saved and already been washed, are your feet dirty? Has it been a while since you kneeled before the Father and you said out loud, Lord, forgive me of my sin? Forgive me of the things that I've picked up on this journey that are not leading me towards you. The things that are making my feet a little heavier than they need to be. Today's the day for you as well. See, there's one thing to know that Jesus forgives you. And let me tell you, if you've been a believer, you already know that. You know Jesus forgives you. But there are moments in life where you look at him and you say, Lord, would you forgive me? And it's different. It's one thing to know it. It's another thing to do it. Are your feet dirty? Jesus can wash your sin as you continue your journey towards him. Bottom line, we must, like Peter, reach a place where Jesus gets it all. We must, like Peter, not only just leave it all to follow him, but give him everything we took with us, to give it all to him. And you may not fully understand it, but you will. And your response to that, church, is either never or you can have it all.